Hi, this is just a quick introduction from JR on video to the audio recording of about 1 hour conversation that I had, mostly a question or a couple of questions asked by Thomas, and then I answered. My wife participates a little bit, and the question Thomas asks is in regard to my expectations about the future of the United States. I will note briefly for people who don't know Thomas or who don't know the background of these conversations. These are from weekly conversations that I have. I've talked to Thomas a few weeks ago, and I knew him originally through his looking on the internet for content, and eventually he found my blog and contacted me, and that was years ago. And so this is a recording where he and I and my wife had been talking for about 1 hour prior to this recording. So it is like all of a sudden, here's Thomas's question, and then my reply with references to earlier in that hour and our prior conversations and interactions. So I'll go ahead and start the recording in a moment. If you have an interest in the subject matter in here, or want to ask anything relating to the general calls, please feel free to do so. And here I'll get into exactly how Thomas asked his question in regard to my sense of the future of the United States, and then the reply that I offered, and the conversation that proceeded from there. Wait, one more quick note. When Thomas begins to talk about California and the infrastructure of California, he is referencing water and the availability of drinking water. So that's what we had just been talking about. That's where the recording actually picks up. He's talking about infrastructure, California, and then how that relates to patterns within the U.S. as far as not noticing risks. That's how I rephrase what he was saying later. So here's what he has to say.
I prefer to kind of look at everything and see if I can see where the connections are. What I see with the United States is, for example, in the infrastructure, the crumbling infrastructure, the pattern of ignoring the problems and just putting them off, to the point where, say, California is right now without a reserve, without a lifeline, basically, without a reserve parachute or a lifeboat. And much of the United States, from an outsider's point of view, looks like that to me. What I would ask you is, what's your view on what's taking place in the United States right now? In terms, and we can include the U.S. dollar in this, the massive spending, what they call it, the printing of money, that sort of thing. Gradually, what I see is a declining civilization almost, with no intention whatsoever from those in political power to do anything about stopping that decline. What's your point of view on the United States as a whole right
now? Well, my point of view about the United States, first of all, considers the United States to be a branch within a bigger system. So we can certainly talk about something specific like California or the U.S. in general. I'm not necessarily that focused on the U.S. specifically, even though I'm here. There are patterns that I'm quite aware are present in Europe and in Japan, other places. Not every place, because I'm talking about first world problems, you might say. I've heard that term. But there are definitely, there's where people's focus is, and then where the actual risk is, or where the actual opportunity is. Either way you want to look at that, like what's really important, and then where's people's focus. And so I'm talking about what's important according to people, and then what's important from a this kind of speculative, objective perspective of what's really important in terms of what moves history or what guides change, large-scale change included. So the idea that the conversations that the average person has are going to be a tight fit with, what really moves life, I would say that's an issue. So within the scope of the quality of human conversation that people have, some people are more attuned to what really drives change, and some people are more attuned to imprecise presumptions about what drives change, and then some people are not even tuned into the issue of change at all, which is totally understandable if we think about the average 3-year-old or just a wide variety of people with certain kinds of circumstances. They're going to be focused on their own immediate experience and not so much larger social issues or any other issues. But centralization and decentralization is actually related to the question you asked, which we were talking about that a little earlier. As you have institutional technologies where a school system can have a common core curriculum and present it to millions of people, essentially the same content, or we can have with media, we can have a movie, we can have a audio recording, a book, a newspaper, an AP wire. As we can distribute information really broadly, really quickly, there's the potential for consensus in a way that was never really possible. And generally speaking, the average person seems to me to think of consensus as a really attractive thing, and that is also understandable. But consensus itself is an immense risk factor. Not just things like I think that I think that I go to my bathroom, I turn the faucet, and water comes every time, so I don't have to be concerned about water. It's not just that kind of convenience technology where it's not even really like an examined consensus about the issue of the reliability of the water distribution system, right? So a lot of people are really attracted to the idea of consensus, and understandably, I think consensus itself is a primary risk factor in terms of issues not being noticed. So let me contrast that with a diverse set of perspectives. In a diverse set of perspectives, lots of people can look at a lot of issues and then make their assessments, share with each other, and it's possible for risks to be identified earlier and slowly, potentially slowly come to attention. But there's not resistance to new ideas. In a certain extent of consensus, there's an actual resistance to anything unfamiliar. And I think that's really the big risk that we as a species have when we talk about social psychology. The developed nations of the world are moving towards a kind of consensus that is in and of itself not blinding but restrictive. Like there can be a resistance to diverse views. And so there's kind of what I'm presenting as somewhat of a moderate point, then the extreme point of what you could call too much consensus, which will naturally result in disasters and catastrophes and crises, and then that'll move things in the other direction towards decentralization. There's also a point of extreme, to the other direction where people are so decentralized or where conversations are so diverse, where there's all these different languages, all these different perspectives, all these different accents, and people actually aren't able to communicate with each other, or just aren't doing it. And so there can be a breakdown of social structures, a breakdown of expectations. Like, if Facebook goes down for 20 minutes, which apparently it did today, earlier today it was down for like 20 minutes, it produces a noticeable effect. Twitter and other social media sites got a huge amount of traffic when Facebook was down. Mostly people were discussing, what's going on with Facebook, and a little bit of, I don't know if I would say a panic, because I wasn't really paying attention to it, and I don't, I didn't study it or anything, but apparently there was a degree of panic where people have so much reliance on Facebook that, if it is absent for 20 minutes, or if it is cut off for 3 days, what effect will that have on the choice process that people have? All these different people all over the place are used to having TV news available every night, or 24 hours a day with CNN, or they're used to having Facebook or internet access. There can be disorientation periods where some expected resource is gone, whether that's water or internet access or Facebook, whatever it may be. As people get dependent or expectant on a particular resource, there can be panics that would be unprecedented and that you wouldn't have in countries or in cultures where there's less dependence on a particular resource. So, say in Africa, we think Africans are, in certain parts of Africa, they're so focused on water as a restricted resource, or as a scarce resource. So they're really used to conservation. But in the U.S. or in California, if you drop water resource availability by 4% for a month, what happens? Does it create a adversarial context where the people in Southern California or whatever are, breaking off into different groups, and they're experiencing each other with animosity, and instead of collaborating to resolve a common issue, they're actually taking actions in a mode of hysteria or panic or paranoia that make a relatively challenging situation into an extremely challenging situation, or where they really break a bridge or burn a bridge, metaphorically, in terms of really what's the word for this?
Overreacting?
Well, yeah, overreacting, yes, and putting so much demand on a limited distribution network that they actually create a long-term breakdown in the distribution network. Like, not just a temporary bottleneck on the interstate where everybody has an extra 90-minute delay because of a couple wrecks, but where they have such a catastrophe and have all these trucks fall off. They go through the barricades or the barriers on the side of the interstate, and then they fall off onto off the overpass. The big trucks fall down onto the other thing, and causes serious damage that's going to take weeks to fix, or months to fix. Once you have a breakdown of that extent, there can be occasions where the months that are required to repair something and return it back to the prior functionality where that period of months or whatever period of time, where that period is so long that people like move out of California, like like in the case of a disaster like the hurricanes in I'm thinking about New Orleans several years ago. I think it was 2006 or 2005.
Right.
If you have a breach of the levees and decimation, then people move away and they may not want to move back. Maybe the insurance company says, we'll give you $150,000 to build a new house as long as it's not there. The insurance companies don't want to be part of that area anymore, and the people don't want to be part of that area, and it starts to create a shift where, in the case of New Orleans, it may mean people move inland further, or they move to Alabama or Texas or whatever, neighboring states. But it is a natural thing over the course of history for there to be centralization of consensus, of presumptions, and then high levels of efficiency temporarily and sudden breakdowns when those efficient systems have a few elements unavailable. Then the fleeing away from that can be very sudden. So in the case of the United States, if we think about expatriates and people moving away from the United States, that happened in 1930s, it happened in 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Every decade we can say there have been, people coming to the U.S., people leaving the U.S., people who were born and raised in the U.S. wanting to go somewhere else permanently. If we were to look at the expatriate movement, I would assert, and I have no data to back this up, but in my own experience, in my own social community, I would assert that there has been a shift toward more and more people being interested in where is a safer place to be than the United States, or where is a more favorable place to be than the United States. And within the world as a whole, in the 20th century, generally speaking, the United States was one of the places, apparently, where almost everyone who wasn't here thought of this as the place to be. And then, let's say around the turn of the century, 1999 or something like that, there starts, Y2K.
Right.
At some point, people in the U.S. that were, in many cases, the natives, meaning they were born and raised here, some of those people started to get interested in going somewhere else. And I think to kind of counter my own little speculation there was saying that in the 1960s with the Vietnam military draft, there were a lot of people fleeing the U.S. to Canada. Now, when I say a lot of people, do I mean thousands? Do I mean millions? Do I mean dozens? I think, thousands. But over the course of time, there's going to be waves, cycles, and we're at socionomic researchers. I could spell it out for you if you can't. Robert Prechter, for instance.
Okay.
They would say, and I would agree completely, that we're at the transition point of a massive wave of social psychology and technological inertia, and that when the pendulum flips, it can flip very suddenly or it can flip slowly. And we're at what the socionomic researchers call a grand supercycle, meaning like at least 250 or 300 years of inertia is about to flip and move towards conservatism and decentralization. So if you think about the British Empire or the Dutch East India Company or whatever, several hundred years ago, there was expansion from Europe into the West of the world. There was a end to that. There was the tulip bubble and the Mississippi land bubble, and when those bubbles popped or collapsed or whatever, um, there were financial disasters. Are you familiar with some of the references I just made, or not at all?
Yeah, I've heard of them. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I understand them.
So,
Sure.
If we go back even further in history, the Black Death in Europe that decimated around a third of the population of Europe very quickly, that led to the Renaissance. You wouldn't have had a Renaissance if you didn't have this huge reduction in human population, which basically meant everyone who survived suddenly had 50% more resources available to them, 50% more infrastructure. The infrastructure didn't die. The technology base didn't disappear. What happened was human populations plunged. So in some places they plunged 60%, in other places 30%, in other places 10%, in other places there was no, no massive population decline. But in the case of the Black Death, that led to a period of luxury where people had time.
More resources.
They had time to do art, to study classical liberal arts, to study other languages, to travel. Like the whole set of economic results from the Black Death was basically the Renaissance and all of the, what's called the Age of Enlightenment. You're familiar with all that stuff. So there are cycles, and the Black Death certainly is one thing in European history that we could say this was a huge tragedy, and it was so, devastating. It also was primarily, I'll say it this way, there's been a series of health crises that have affected industrial laborers, like factory workers and coal miners, much more severely than it has affected either the primitive peoples or the elite, aristocratic, rich folks that had better health, better diet, and so on. So we see this ongoing process of a occasional serious challenge to a civilization. And your basic question about what do I see as far as the U.S. or the developed world as a whole, I do see a potential for a sudden, I don't want to say apocalypse, because I'm not into like the global warming hysteria. I do not find it scientifically sound, and I also don't find it to be of enough relevance to me personally in terms of what I can do about it that I really want to research it a lot. So I'm much more interested in researching how can I have a better health paradigm than what I got delivered by the FDA in public schools. That to me is doable and relevant. The issue of like how do we change, how much heat that the sun is projecting to the earth, which affects the temperature of the earth. How do we change the heat of the sun? I don't know that I do. I don't know that I change the heat of the sun, or even me with billions of people. How do we affect the heat of the sun? Maybe we do, but I haven't gotten to that issue yet. Give me a couple months, maybe I'll be stable in my health or whatever other issues, and I'll be like, you know what? Let's form a study group and a think tank, and we're gonna like figure out how do we, influence the sun's radiation. But right now it's a non-issue for me in the general sense. In fact, by the way, I think that we're beginning. We're also about to go into an ice age, which is the climate change thing to me is interesting as a example of consensus and how very good science and very good data has been received with such resistance, with so little receptivity, whether it's climate information or geophysics or astrophysics and so on, medical information. There's tremendous resistance sometimes to new paradigms. And I think that right now, in addition to the fact that we have some infrastructure issues in the developing world that will scare us, they are going to have some scary transitions. Not that a hurricane or a forest fire isn't scary already, or earthquake, or what's it called? What's the big tsunami wave, right?
Tsunami or typhoon.
Right. So I saw some information about some Asian islands that were hit by some tidal waves, and the devastation there was huge. And you can only have that situation when you have like this huge population density right along a coastline. And when you have that density of people, it's hard to evacuate. You give them 90 minutes notice, but it's like 63 million people along some little strip of land. Where are they going to go? The highway goes back and forth along the coastline. So where are they? They're going to have to climb up the mountains, and if they're going to climb up the mountains, and they're 68 years old, that's going to be a challenge, or for some of them. So anyway, so there's cycles. I'm trying to pick up my own little references there. There are crises. I do see a potential for infrastructure breakdown, and in the midst of this what we could call over centralization, that is the spark for people to be interested in decentralization, permaculture, local sustainable agriculture, even things like expatriating from the United States to a less developed area or a more progressive place, like I don't know. I'm going to say Singapore. Like, I'm not saying Singapore as a utopian thing necessarily, but just as an unusual case. What has happened in Singapore with their currency, with their government, it is different from a lot of other places. So when you look for where can you compete with the currency stability of Switzerland, it's not a long list. United Arab Emirates, New Zealand, and Singapore are my short list, and that is off of memory, not off of any recent research. I could be wrong, but I think I may have said to you that socionomists have some very favorable predictions about the stock market and economy of Taiwan. Have I ever told you that?
No, I haven't heard it.
Yeah, so I could give you the background on that. But if you look at the stock market price index for Taiwan and you compare it to Mexico and the United States and Great Britain and some of these other nations, you can see some patterns that are more like South Korea and just I don't really want to get off into that right now because I don't even know that you're interested. But if I were to talk to you about market forecasting, I could talk to you about price to earnings ratio, and I could talk to you about like measurable, objective things. And if we were to look at all of these different stock markets throughout the world, all these different national groupings, we could definitely say, in the United States, it's one of the most high-risk stock markets on the planet right now. Like, I don't know all of the markets on the planet, but I know in Europe there's been no recovery in the last few years. From 2009, from March of 2009 in the U.S. and certain places, Japan and other places, there's been a notable recovery. In London or in the United Kingdom, there's been almost no recovery. And that is, there's reasons for that. And back to your original question, the fact that the U.S. hasn't recovered, if I had to pick one reason, my really short reason would be oil production. But I could also say the U.S. happens to be a military superpower, which is related to oil production and other factors too. But the U.S. has rebounded for good reasons, and the extent of the rebound has been so so distinct amongst the world. Like people within the U.S. aren't related to global economics. One of the things about investors and people in the U.S. is because we think we're in this insulated, like, utopian kind of thing. In some ways we have thoughts like that in the U.S. It's an odd idea for us to think, well, let's check out what's going on in Europe, Greece, Italy, Japan, Asia, etc., Africa, Europe. I already said Europe. So the idea that an investor in the U.S. should be considerate of global trends, it's not offensive to a U.S. investor. It's simply not on their radar. They're actually that negligent in terms of being that presumptive or that naive. And when I say that negligent, I mean somebody who has a portfolio of $1 million, for them not to be interested in, like, risk and opportunity is because they've got a portfolio of $1 million and they think they have all this security and safety. They can, like Warren Buffett lost $67 million a few years ago or something. Well, he had hundreds of millions of dollars, so when he lost $67 million, it hurt, but that was only like 20%. So, I've just made up my numbers, by the way. But he did lose a lot of money, but he doesn't have a lot of motivation to be attentive to risk. One of my interests is to help people be attentive to risk and opportunity as it relates to health, as it relates to economics, as it relates to communication, in terms of like patterns of communication. And for instance, the idea that something is wrong, someone is wrong, and then something needs to be done to fix what's wrong. So that little sequence that I just stated for you, that's all a understandable, common experience based on stress hormones and we were talking about fear a few weeks ago. People say something's wrong from a perspective of like panic or hysteria as an extreme form of fear. That's the only reason somebody would say something is wrong in that particular way. Not to say like, oh, you spelled that wrong or something's wrong with, something's wrong with the tuning on my guitar, right? So when people say something is wrong and then someone is wrong or some group of people is wrong, when they get off into those kinds of thought forms, those are expressions of an extreme kind of panic. They correspond to elevated stress hormones, and they will, for people who aren't stressed and receive those kind of communications, it can cause stress. So you can get a loop of feedback, right, where there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. A lot of the FDA says saturated fat and cholesterol are poisonous, and so somebody goes, really? The FDA said that? Well, I'm going to cut out blah blah blah. So we get a feedback loop where people are taking potentially excessive responses. So if we spread out the logic and take out, reduce some of the stress hormones, improve people's health a little bit, give them some saturated fat and cholesterol for their brains to function a little better, then slowly lay out the science to them, they may think, wow, you know what, this whole thing about every liver on the planet producing cholesterol, there could be something to that. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not poisonous. So, salt, another one. When people say, the human body, how's it gonna deal with salt? Humans shouldn't have salt in them, right? Do you know my response to that idea, Thomas?
God.
What?
We come from the sea.
Well, right. We evolved out of the ocean, if that's the reference you're making.
Kind of like we are the sea.
Yes, right. The plasma in our blood is a evolutionary refinement of ancient ocean water, ancient ocean plasma, the liquid crystal plasma. But the reference I was making as far as salt is every human body makes it. I don't know that people in general are aware of that detail, but the stomach acid, which is hydrogen and chlorine, HCl, hydrochloric acid, that stomach acid combines with baking soda, which is produced by the pancreas in every mammal, every reptile, like it's not specific to humans. And so salt is what's made when you take the base or the alkaline substance of baking soda and put it there with the stomach acid. It's to protect the intestines from the intensity of that stomach acid. So we've got all that baking soda that's alkaline. It protects the stomach acid, the stomach lining, and or I meant to say the intestinal lining, like the small intestines.
Okay.
Right. So outside of the stomach, you've got the hydrochloric acid and the other contents of the stomach in terms of the food that's been digested or started to be digested. And then they add the baking soda from the pancreas, and what is produced from that? Some of the hydrogen from the HCl combines with some of the oxygen from the baking soda, and it makes water. So we make water in our small intestines. One of the other things we do is take sodium from the baking soda and chlorine from the hydrochloric acid or stomach acid, and we make salt.
Salt.
And,
Fascinating.
It is actually used to... what I've read from a different source is that the salt crystals actually are, they're sharp. And there is an actual value. There's a mucous membrane around a healthy intestinal tract, but the salt crystals being present in the digestive tract has been there for millions, billions of years, and reptiles, mammals, you name it, sharks, whatever, right? They have digestive systems that have stomach acid and baking soda to balance the acidity of the stomach acid with the alkaline substance of this baking soda. So everybody's got salt, and we evolved out of an ocean of salt water. So the idea that putting salt on my skin is going to be detrimental is actually kind of an unusual idea. And if somebody lacks salt and you put a little salt on their skin and then they have a rash and it itches and they're like, hey, I don't like that, it's itchy, it hurts, then it may be that the salt was a nutritional deficiency that suddenly when salt is made available, now all sorts of electromagnetic activity is happening in that area that couldn't before the salt was there. So we do want to be attentive to producing excessively intense detoxification. I'm saying this to you with the expectation that you know exactly what I'm talking about, but
yes, I do.
Yeah. So
I do.
I've given kind of a long. Go ahead.
I am familiar with the detox, all the detox diets and stuff.
Sure.
I tried them out some time ago and said, then upon more investigation, I said maybe it's not as necessary as people claim.
Yeah, for sure, you can detox without being on an intentional diet. If you nourish yourself and you have toxins, you're going to detox. Unless you suppress your immune system function with cough suppressants or whatever else, it's natural that people will detox if there are toxins present, and then sufficient nutrients and resources to remove the toxins, they're gonna. And if they don't have the capacity to remove it, then they're gonna have the potential for tumors of waste matter to aggregate, accumulate. And those things can be surgically removed, or they can be removed through, white blood cells and the just regular immune system activity. People can have a tumor disappear, or what a lot of people call cancer goes into remission. I made a joke about this that I don't know where remission is, but there must be a lot of cancer by now there, because all this cancer keeps going into remission, and I don't know of any cancer, I guess occasionally some cancer comes out of remission. But wherever remission is and whatever it is, it must have a lot of cancer in it by now. So, and that brings me actually to the point of irony and humor. We were talking about language and, introspection. I don't necessarily want to say anything about it, but humor, just it's notable. I will say this. It's notable how serious and intense and afraid some people can be, and then how relaxed and casual some people can be, whether through naivety or through really having their stuff together, they're really having their head straight, let's say.
Right.
I'm attempting to avoid certain curse words. And then there's another extreme of somebody who's like kind of deliriously casual. Not that it's unhealthy, but that it's like less functional than a moderate level. So there's like the extreme seriousness, extreme silliness, and somewhere in between. When you talked about responsibility earlier, a responsible person wouldn't be likely the pinnacle of responsibility wouldn't be silly and immature, and wouldn't be paranoid and hysterical unless really examining issues and choosing, like, let's make this an urgent priority in a kind. I don't know if you can call that hysteria anymore. It's like there's panic, there's hysteria, there's paranoia, and there's just like emergency. When people say it's an emergency, it's a crisis, let's set everything else aside and focus on this really big issue, whether that's climate change or my solvency of my finances so I can avoid foreclosure of my home, whatever the issues are that people might think of as urgent. It is a concern to me when someone suggests to me that no one should ever have urgency. That, to me, is a low level of mental health, frankly. So, like a low level of realism, I guess. So anyway, I wanted to acknowledge that I've gone on for a fair amount of time, and I thought you might want to make some comments. Anything that I covered, or a new direction you want to go, any further question you want to raise. Just wanted to return the spotlight to you. See anything you wanted to comment on or ask about. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I enjoy listening, and I would say over the last couple of months, in these days, I'm kind of in that almost a mode of kind of like a holding pattern, going through some transitions. Everything from setting myself up in a new job, finding a new apartment. Currently, I'm right on this beautiful lake, but it means I got to drive 38 minutes to and from work.
Okay.
So such points of considerations. My considerations these days are more in terms of, wow, I really like living here. But if I don't want to drive, I can move to a kind of city which is crowded and somewhat dirty, lower the standard of living. So these are my primary considerations right now. Kind of like the holding pattern, wherein I say, yeah, I've got a responsibility to myself and to the world as part of it, but also that saying, don't stop living, or you can't stop living just to stay alive, does come up. Whereas I say, hey, I'm going to enjoy myself while I'm doing this at the same time. So put in effort to pay attention, to participate within what's going on in the world, learn about things, understand things. I mean, like you said, people talk to each other. Listening is a key thing that I've been working on over the years too, just to stop the interpretation. For example, as you're speaking, stop the mind from interpreting, showing me comparisons, showing me pictures in my mind, and just hear the words and listen. So things like that I can do. But overall, currently, and probably for the next month or so, I put myself in almost a holding pattern, which is a transition phase, going from spending the last 3 years at home, comfortable, working very little, but researching a lot, writing a lot, mostly about myself. Who am I? Writing out these constructs and saying, okay, this is who I've been, and wow, not such a nice guy, not the kind of guy I would, right, to be, not the kind of personality I'd like to die with.
One of the things that I have a sense of in relation to you is that you have a certain, everybody presents a certain level of stress, and if you talk to somebody, 5 times or 20 minutes, there might be a variation in the stress levels, but for a lot of people, it's relatively, a certain range. And to go to a residential setting that's near a lake, I assume it's relaxing and beautiful. And
Yep.
that is a good thing to do up to a point, right? And in my own case, when I came to Arizona, it was 1999, and I went to a rural area, and I operated from a mode of relative isolation, seclusion, withdrawal, and I got into things that I wasn't, able to. When I lived in Florida previously, I had social momentum. So people would call me, I would call them. There were just common things that I would do. And for me to come to Arizona, especially the rural mountains of northeast Arizona where there's not many humans, it put me in a context where I was there with nature. I was there with the internet. And there was, 15,000 people in the town 6 miles away from where I lived, which was like a little, I guess you could say, suburb of maybe 900 people. Then,
Wow.
a town of 15,000 or so a few miles away, something like 15 minutes driving because it was not the best roads, but it's, mountain and some gravel roads, and if it snows, there's all sorts of factors that were not part of my personal experience prior to living there. But to live in that situation, it forced me to slow down. I had breakdowns and catastrophes from the simplest things like I'm in an arid climate of Arizona, and I didn't know that I needed to check the water levels in my car battery. So I, ran out of water in my car battery, and it died. And you have, if you're at Walmart when they close at midnight in January at 6,500 foot elevation, and you have a 36-minute drive home, and there's no cars around to jump you. Here'd be a good example. I played music at bars as a musician. So we we take all our equipment out of the bar. It's like 1 a.m. the bar closes. 1:30 we're nearly done unloading. Everybody else pulls out. And if I happen to be the last one to sit in my car and turn over my engine, and everybody else is left, then that's a tricky situation in rural Arizona. At certain places, even certain bars, there's just not that much around. I never had that happen at a bar, but it just makes for a good analogy. And probably somebody at the bar, there'd be some employees still there, generally speaking. But where I actually broke down was at home, and I wouldn't have any neighbors or roommates or anything nearby me. So, you get up at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. to go to work, and it's frozen outside, and you've got a car and a battery, but no juice in the battery. It sets up a delay in my day, and I have to get somebody to come to me to jump me, and then jump the car battery, and then I get to work an hour and a half late, and I spend $60 or whatever to get them to come jump my car, and if my budget's tight, that's a big deal. So
Right.
So in coming to Arizona, I encountered this in the same time as a lot of relaxation. I also was faced with a bunch of, I guess you could say, irresponsibilities, but I mean it more like naivety and presumption. It wasn't like irresponsible necessarily in a regular sense of the word. It's just I didn't know to check my water levels in my battery. Nobody told me that, or if they had, they told me that, and I ignored them. I don't know. Maybe I was irresponsible, but I get, it's like the point is I can call that irresponsible. I can say the person that I was when I arrived in Arizona in 1999 was really naive, or was really foolish, right? In terms of expecting to come to this rural area that I went to and be able to adapt and adjust quickly. Well, I may have gone for too much adventure, too much isolation. If you go out to the forest, in the U.S., you can go to, say, to a national forest and go out 30 miles hiking past where anybody else is, and you go by yourself, and then it gets to be nightfall, and it's winter, and you start to realize this might not have been the best thing to do. You want to incrementally explore the wilderness and relaxation, not go into the bears, dense population of bears or something, right? So we want to recognize. In my case, I'm a suburban kid originally, so I grew up in the suburbs. So when I go into an urban setting, as I did in Southside urban Chicago in the early 90s, that was very foreign to me, a lot of culture shock. When I go to a rural area of Arizona in 1999 or any other time I've done something like that, again, culture shock. I'm faced with the fact that I'm used to having people around. I'm used to talking to people. And
right.
So there's a transition, and it can be disorienting, and it can be challenging, and it can be really helpful to recognize when something's not working for me and find support or find or even make a change. If something's too stressful and I have the ability to move to the country for a few months, by a lake, that sounds pretty good to me. So if you want to switch, we can do like a house swapping, right? What?
It is a month-to-month lease I'm on here. It's actually just fantastic. Month-to-month. It's a month-to-month lease on this here right here. So it's great. It's an option. It's an option that I can keep open for quite some time, or if I find something better, just move. And these are the questions. Which way do we go? What do we do? And
so did you know that this morning I created a video and an article called "I Don't Know What to Do"?
Interesting. I gotta watch that.
It's a parody. So it's also totally based on real experience. Firsthand, the kinds of things that I say to myself, or maybe not exactly the words that I would use, but that relate to my experience. This general sense of I don't know what to do, and it's a problem, or it's a dilemma. That's the word I used at the very beginning. And I don't know what to do is eventually also the exact same circumstance that I call freedom, or open-mindedness, or curiosity. I don't know what to do. Okay. I also use the term boredom to refer to it. So it doesn't have to be a dilemma. It can just be, it's kind of moderately unfavorable. I'm unsatisfied. I'm unfulfilled. I'm bored. It could be it could be lots of things. And it also isn't in itself true in any absolute sense. There's things that I know what to do about. There are things that I know to do. And then if I get them done, then after that, I don't know what to do next.
Right. It's a constant state of, almost like you said, freedom, where you have the responsibility to do what you do because you have the freedom. You don't have to do something else. Often when we have to do things, it's quite easier. When people don't have options, life in many ways may be seen as simpler because we don't have options. Like people, for example, who have children have to go to work every day and consider their family first. They're not they don't have so many options in terms of what they want to do. It's always a consideration of what is best for the family.
Well,
so their life is simple.
I like that reference. It also reminds me of the empty nest syndrome. Do you know the terminology I'm using?
Yep, sure.
So after the children move out, the parents
Right.
used to having all this structure and all this noise or whatever in the household, all this activity, all these demands on their time, all these responsibilities, and then the kids go to college or whatever the circumstances. As the household is now free of children, many people experience a period of disorientation, I guess would be one way to put it. So any particular person, I think my wife, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second. When you came to the U.S. and first, even when we were in Phoenix, before we came to Mesa, which is just for your information, Thomas, Phoenix and Mesa are adjacent,
Okay.
they're like, 3 miles apart or something, or 20 miles, but whatever. Was there a period of like a lack of momentum, like a disorientation with the lack of momentum, like the lack of future plans or the lack of structure? I guess, she says. And I do know that you were active in landmark education at that time, but then as over time that concluded and you had, things that were familiar to you, and then when there's not much familiar and you have all these new things, it can be stressful, right, Thomas? You get the reference I'm making?
Exactly.
Right? So go ahead. You
Sure.
want to say more? Just a second, Thomas.
Not having a job, that has been really...
So for over a year, well, actually you were in school before that, so for however long, my wife hasn't had a full-time job, so she's done some work, but, and I think that you would probably say that, you kind of liked having that work even though it wasn't a lot, like, kind of...
Yeah, I like having something to do, but...
I like having something to do, she says.
But it's not, it's not...
I know, right. And it's also not the kind of structure that she had been used to. It's also not the kind of compensation she'd been used to. But, so when people retire, when they're injured, like in my case, when I can go back to when I broke my leg in elementary school, but when any injury that interferes with my ability to do what's familiar to me, there can be a period of disorientation, So I can think like, I've got too much freedom. I don't know what to do with all this time on my hands. People say things like that, and maybe not with distress, but with stress. And it's interesting that relaxation or, being in jail. What do you do if you got, let's say somebody is in jail and they know they're just going to be there for like 5 days, okay? So I don't know if you're aware of this, Thomas, but I have been in jail, and in a lot of cases it's like minor issues. They just, it's just like 5 days and then you're gone. Like you're not, that's all there is to it. Like, it's not like a DUI or some kind of more serious offense where you have 5 days, then they let you go, and then you have to come back and blah, blah, blah. Some things, you do 5 days, and that's it. They don't even really care if you're guilty. They just arrest you, you're in there for 5 days, and then after that, they're like, well, that was as severe a punishment as you were going to get for the whole thing, so move on. I don't know what charges, what crimes I would assert for other people, but in my case, it's typically been traffic, like driving, driving without insurance, you'll just get a fine, but there are certain things, driving without a license, if you don't have or if you have a suspended license and you still drive, that's one of the things that I did several times and got arrested for, and I'd be put in jail for brief periods, and it's boring. It's so boring. So I'm used to having certain, internet access, and I want to be able to exercise or whatever. And one of the things actually in jail for people who are there for years or at least months, a lot of people do get into exercise or some other thing that they weren't doing outside of that restricted situation. But because of the confinement, because of the limited access to alternatives, there's basically, you can do exercise and you can talk to the people who are there. And you can watch TV and stuff. But talking to the people that are there is a unique thing. You're crammed together. In my case, I was crammed together with a lot of people. They're coming and going a little bit, but crammed together with a lot of people who are all victims of the system. Everybody in jail, almost like 97%. Oh my God, my girlfriend reported me. Really? My girlfriend reported me too. Really? My mom reported me. Oh wow, your mom reported? So.
I understand that.
So yeah, it was interesting, and it was an interesting social situation. Actually, honestly, that was one of the things that was unusual and interesting for me. And I have been in jail a few times because I kept doing the same thing over and over. But it was interesting to me to be exposed to the kinds of conversations that inmates would have about why they were there, or about their lives in general, but in particular about why they were there. And you could imagine, maybe, I assume you don't have personal experience, but you can imagine that a lot of people have what I would call disempowered or disempowering conversations. They're victims, like I said, they're victims of the system. They're in distress, and that's completely reasonable. Why are people in jail? Because they're in distress, and they made some choice based on distress or based on naivety. They drove too fast. You go 30 miles over the speed limit, and you end up in jail, or whatever the situation is. It doesn't have to be, incredibly, embarrassing thing that someone does. But in most cases, going 30 miles over the speed limit, it's like, unless you're racing, why are you why does someone do that? Like, it's just, it is weird. So, it was interesting. One of the things that I learned being in jail a few times in Arizona was the vast majority of offenses were driving related, and a huge amount were driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence, DUI. Those were a huge portion of the male prison or male jail population in the county jail, like, the low level offenses. Tons of driving related stuff.
Right.
And of course there were some drug crimes and so on. But anyway, so you had said you had in mind to prepare some lessons. What do you want to say as we perhaps wrap up our conversation? Any other points you want to make? Questions you want to raise? You can also ask my wife questions if you want.
Yeah. No, I just thank you very much. Actually enjoyed listening. It's cool because as I've been listening and talking, I was riding my bike around. I just got back around the lake, so actually it's an excellent combination of the lake, bicycle ride, exercise, and listening to you. Quite very interesting, actually. And I do have a lot more questions, but they'll come. I enjoy these. I enjoy these. What are they called? Skype conferences. Pretty cool, actually. And no, now I'm going to go ride my motorcycle into the town of 60,000, just 6 miles away, 6 kilometers away, and get my takeout Chinese food, which I've been doing for a couple of months, a month and a half now.
Yeah.
Takeout Chinese every day.
What are some of your favorite? What are some of your favorite things to eat?
It's kind of fun.
He is in China.
What are some of your favorite things to eat as far as the things that you order there, or maybe you don't order them frequently, just your favorites?
Oh, I would like I think in China, in English you call it General Ho's chicken or something, Gongba Jiding, General something chicken. I like that, and I like the pork. It's in English would be braised. Kind of like braised pork. It's boiled and it's kind of got the skin, the fat, and the meat and stuff like that. So it's cooked for a long time, very soft. And then the vegetables. So I try to get as many vegetables as I can, considering the nutrition, making sure that I am getting nutrition from the fast Chinese food. It's called a zitutan, where you just pick out your food, and some woman pokes around in it, looks at it, and says 80 NT or 60 NT. Generally, each meal cost me about, I would say, about $2 for a big meal. It's actually quite cool over here.
Yeah.
And I eat everything. I eat everything.
Yeah. Okay. Your favorite is everything on the menu, huh? Cool.
So,
All
but
right.
thank you very much. And
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's been interesting. I
eat it.
What's that? What did you say right before I eat it?
I didn't say anything. Just take it on my bicycle.
Okay. If
Oh,
it's
no,
on the menu, I eat it. I think is what you said, but I wasn't
Oh,
sure.
I do have lajiao. I do have hot sauce.
You have what?
I do have hot sauce.
You
Hot
like
sauce.
to add hot sauce?
So,
Okay.
I'll make it tastier.
Very
Some
good.
Hot sauce. And
Very good. All right. So General Ho's Chicken is one of your
Okay,
recommendations.
JR, thank you very much.
All right. Well, I'll be in touch with you later.
Oh,
I think our connection might be chopping. Anything else you
Okay,
want to say, or are we
talk
done?
later. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Good evening.
I'm cool. I'll talk to you next week probably. Thanks.
Okay. Bye. Yeah, we had a delay.
All right, so there it is, the casual, friendly conversation about what's the future of the USA, featuring our closing references to dietary preferences if you live in Taiwan, I guess. So, as I had said at the very initial video introduction, if you are interested in asking questions or participating in these calls, we typically are doing the calls through Skype, so that allows us to connect with people in Taiwan or Europe or anywhere in the world. And if you, I don't know how you are watching this video if you don't already know about this, but you can look on Facebook for Santa Skeptics. If you're seeing this on YouTube, you just reply to me and JR, and I will give you information if you request about what we're doing and how you can participate. I think that's about it. So I welcome your questions. Feel free to share this with anyone you like, Facebook or otherwise, and we will be doing another call soon. So if you're interested in participating, feel free to request that I let you know what times we are having calls, and if you're in an unusual time zone or have an unusual circumstance, feel free to suggest a time. Incidentally, Thomas was in Taiwan where it was Thursday morning, while we were in Arizona where it was Wednesday night during the call that you just heard. So, hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for listening.